You're watching Politics Unscripted. Well, South Africa will go to the polls in just over a month. A new feature of these elections will be the independent candidates hoping to get a slice of the voting electorate. Well, as smaller parties, the One South Africa movement is targeting 10 municipalities for the upcoming local government elections. Independents in South African politics hardly make inroads into elections. So how does a smaller party like One South Africa movement, by the way, the reason it's called a movement is that Musa Maimane is trying to get it not to be mentioned as a political party, but he is building a movement nonetheless. Let's speak to Mr. Maimane, who joins us all the way from Cape Town. Mr. Maimane, thank you very much for your time. You are building what one would label a movement of candidates, independent candidates, and you are hoping that you are going to field some of them in the upcoming local government elections. However, there is what is called the Direct Elections Bill, which is before Parliament and it's yet to be passed there. So my question to you is, how do you hope, or what section of the Electoral Act will you be using for these independent candidates to be able to contest in this election?
Good afternoon, Toli, and good afternoon to fellow South Africans. I think this is a historic moment. When we went into these elections, we always felt that the party political system took power upon itself, imposed it on the people, and ultimately we end up with things like state capture and no accountability. So we wanted to reverse the system, and obviously, we worked with a New Nation movement to fight the constitutional, to challenge the Electoral Act in the Constitutional Court. And the Concord sided with us to say that it must be such that by 2024, there can be direct elections of candidates even for Parliament. When it comes to local government, that has always been the case. And what we found, which was for us a very important feature of these elections, is that in the Electoral Act, Section 15 of the Electoral Act allows you the space to register a local organization. So, for example, you take a community like in Kabeja or in Queenstown or wherever it is, you can set up an association. That association can get leaders from its communities that come and stand for election, because we fundamentally believe that leadership isn't just a function of political parties. It comes from civic societies from elsewhere. Let them form a group of people that can stand for election. Let the community who know the people, they don't need to be introduced to them, know them, vote for them. And let's give the best skills to a local council and ultimately also be able to benefit from the proportional representative component of the vote. So we are trying and we are working it in all of the communities you've just cited. And we've attracted a great diversity of candidates from all across. And I think for it to be an election, we believe will be a model that can be replicated over and over as communities take back the power.
All right. Why the choice of these 10 municipalities? Why, or perhaps let's start with which municipalities are these and why have they become your target as yourselves and the independents that you are rooting for?
Well, I think on the first instance is that we went after municipalities where we believed not only were in conditions that were in desperate need of change. So if you went to Queenstown today, you'd discover very quickly that that municipality is without water and often service delivery is hampered, as would be a general case as the first criteria. The second is you look for a municipality where electoral dominance, to your earlier comment about whether do independents succeed or not, we need to work hard to ensure that they succeed. So there's no use going into a municipality where, for example, the ANC gets 90% of the vote. It becomes difficult to bring the change. The third dynamic is that you needed to find a municipality where there was a viable partner organization and candidates. Because you can't stand up before the electorate and say you want ethical leadership, non-corruption, competence, and then end up taking people who had either failed in politics or kicked out of their own parties and say, now these are your candidates because they come from your community. You needed people that believe a set number of things: non-racialism, ethical leadership, the idea that they must deliver for the people. So we exercised that strict criteria, And then ultimately we ended up with a broad array of municipalities across the country.
Yeah.
So a municipality like Mfuleni is but one, so in Joburg, in Gauteng that is, which I'll be there even during the week working with candidates there, and the Greater Vaal, and you know the conditions of those municipalities. Greater Letaba, for example, in Limpopo, and there are many multiple examples in the city of Cape Town, in particular communities, when you get to Kukuletu, Langa, Kailicha, etc., Mfuleni. These are communities upon which you say, government here has neglected people. We need to work with those communities so that they can bring change in there.
Mr. Maimane, as you well know, contesting elections is an expensive exercise. Where and how are you sourcing funding in order to finance the respective election campaigns of these independent candidates?
Yeah, this is where if you like, the genius of the model is. Because if you want to contest nationally and put a national party on the table, it runs into hundreds and thousands of rand. And secondly, you've got to then have a unified poster distribution across the country, which costs money. I come from big infrastructure, big political machine. And what you end up with is just a machine that ultimately is self-feeding, self-contained. In this instance, we've been able, firstly, it's cheap to register an organization. It's less than a few thousand rand. And secondly, for candidates to contest is also just as inexpensive, which gives access to that leader who runs a spaza shop, but really is a community representative to be able to be on the ballot.
I'm surprised you say this.
Yeah.
Can you put a price to registering a political entity?
Yeah, it's in a Section 15A, it's less than even 5,000 rand and then in that instance, you are able to attract community activism truly at its core for people to contribute to it. You avoid issues of state capture where someone comes and becomes a benefactor and says, hey, I'm going to put money on this table. And then where the real expense comes in is about making sure that you can spend for every ward, because you're competing with big machines like the big parties, you are able to put a few thousands of rands to do postering or leaflets, or actually, as technology has allowed us the space to do so, you are able to directly interface with voters.
So, as I asked, where are you getting money in order for these independents to mount an effective election campaign? And, importantly, do you account by way of disclosing where that funding comes from? We have a new law that's come into place. It's called the Political Party Funding Act. In fact, it's just disclosed, albeit 3 parties, where they get their funding from.
Yeah. So what effectively happens in this instance, we're registered as a NPC, so we don't fall into the party political funding instance. And what we try and deliberately do is we've had a number of people from different parts make contributions, small contributions. So the threshold is often over 100,000 rand. So you get a number of people who make donations directly often to these organizations and associations in their own locale. So if you really interrogate the issue, you can really go to Queenstown and look at the Queenstown business communities, people who run bottling companies, who run various entities. They fund many of the candidates. So that would be in Queenstown, and then I can take you through various places in Mfuleni, etc. Our job is to make sure that at a collective national level, we're able to direct donors there, but furthermore also attract donors who may look at saying, hey, for the importance of democracy and power back to the people, we want to be able to assist our citizens in this regard.
So if you don't account, or if there is no obligation, unlike political parties, to disclose where your funding comes from, do you accept funding from foreign donors, for example?
We would need to, because simply, and it's not foreign donors as in companies, etc., because we realize that it's a big campaign, and between now and 2024, we'll obviously work harder at ensuring, and I mean, we want to uphold transparency. In fact, we were very clear, even on our website, you can see how much money has gone on to the organization, etc. And you can, by 2024, or at least we'll want to make sure it's transparent. People will know who funds what and where it comes from. So Transparency does not need to be obligated by law. It ought to be something that you practice just as a principle. And what we've asked is that we want to pursue the space where ultimately ordinary people like myself, I can give 1,000 rand to a campaign. The law doesn't oblige me to disclose that, but actually I can demonstrate to people that I'm giving a few thousand here and a few thousand there.
Where do people access this information, Mr. Maimane, to say, this is how much money we have received, and it is received from donor so-and-so or company so-and-so, in order for there to be complete transparency? Because when it comes to foreign donors, and the issue of foreign donors is that there is always the fear that they will likely engineer a so-called, what have they said it before, they will engineer some kind of regime change, if you like.
Yeah, I see what that is, particularly for these local government elections. One of the things that you can quite comfortably do is you can interrogate the organization that sits in your municipality. So, for example, in Mfuleni, there's an organization called the New Horizon Movement. There, they'll have a website, they'll have details of who their donors are, and any citizen who is voting in Mfuleni can interrogate that. And it would be true whether it be in Queenstown, in KZN, in the Mpopo, in the Northwest. It doesn't matter where. You can be able to, through these municipalities, be able to interrogate them.
Okay. All right. So you've mentioned that these independent candidates, at the core, they will be endorsed by communities from which they come. But a crucial element here, Mr. Maimane, is that how do people then hold these independent candidates, should they win, of course? How do we hold them accountable in a case of underperformance or corruption? What is the mechanism to hold them to account, or actually even get them fired?
Absolutely. And the next step, because we recognize that that's a very important question of how democracy works, we've set up the reason you couldn't just leave them just to be independent, to say, I am so-and-so from Ward 50, I don't account to anyone, I just don't do anything. We say you're part A of a local municipal organization. That's the first thing. Secondly, all the people who have sponsored your vote because you belong to a particular voter community, those people they know better than anyone else who is corrupt, who is living there. And often we hold people accountable only for corruption. We forget that there are services, there's communication to voters, so all of that. And then once the community feels that candidate X in community Y is not performing, they're able to, through the same mechanism of putting votes together where they nominated the candidate, through the same mechanism, they can request for that candidate to be recalled or to be voted out. And it's the community themselves. It's not Musi Maimane sitting at some head office and because so-and-so is no longer part of my faction or opposing my faction, who can decide what happens to that candidate. Once the community has lost confidence in that candidate for whatever reason, they can put their complaint forward to the local organization, and the local organization, by virtue of people voting, can terminate the membership of that particular candidate in that in which case then you simply just inform the municipal manager, and then it triggers in the normal processes you would take to remove a councillor, which is then a by-election and then a fresh election. So we wanted intentionally and purposefully to give power back to the people, because by the time in a political party, power sits with a political party, and even if you as a resident says so-and-so is corrupt, the party says we will investigate, we will tell you whether it's so or not, and if they're in the right faction, they can get medical parole quickly.
Okay. Musi Maimane, let's leave that discussion there. Thank you very much for explaining some of these intricacies for